What should you know about the Wuhan Coronavirus? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The Wuhan Coronavirus is probably the most hot topic in the news right now. In Canada especially, because over the weekend, the first presumptive case of the Wuhan Coronavirus was discovered in Toronto. Buckle up, Canada. It's found us. At the time of this recording, though, it's still a presumptive case, meaning that it's likely to be this Wuhan virus, but it's not 100% confirmed yet. They still need to do a further test on it. So, based on that, there are a few things worth knowing about these viruses to better protect yourself. The first thing to note is that the Wuhan coronavirus isn't the first coronavirus to ever exist. If you remember SARS, something like that can also be classified as a coronavirus. Coronavirus is better thought of as an umbrella term, and this Wuhan variant is just another particular type of it. So, coronaviruses, or CVs, are actually a large family of contagion that cause a wide array of problems for humans. They can induce flu-like symptoms, and the extreme, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which is better known as SARS. The Wuhan variant of these CVs is a new breed, though, that hasn't been identified in humans before. It's a new thing, meaning there isn't a current vaccine or a cure. If you get it, you kind of have to hope that your body naturally finds a way to overcome it. And in the current circumstances, the most vulnerable people are those with a weak immune system, so the elderly or the very young. If you're a healthy adult, chances are you'll be okay. So the thing about these coronaviruses is that initially they are transmitted between humans and animals. Then later, the infected human is able to pass that on to other people, but the initial source does come from an animal. So how did this happen in China? Multiple sources report that the Wuhan virus started in a Chinese market. They call them wet markets. So imagine a narrow corridor with multiple vendors all selling produce. So things like raw meat, there's caged chickens, seafood, even some more exotic items like bats and snakes, and everything else you typically find in one of these wet markets. Now, unfortunately, the sanitary conditions are not the best in these type of areas. There's things like blood everywhere, dead carcasses, animal bodies just laying around, and it's a breeding ground for contamination. It's a virus's paradise, basically. The close proximity of all these different types of animals, either dead or alive, is just not a good idea, especially when combined with lackluster sanitation practices. Reports are asking the question, though, what types of animals were even in this particular market to produce this new virus that we've never seen before? Some sources speculate that bats and snakes were part of the menu. One of the going theories right now is that the virus originated in a bat and then was transferred to snakes, and then from the snakes it became a part of the human anatomy. And it's interesting too, because these viruses aren't necessarily spread via eating the animal. That's possibly one way to get it, but it's also possible too that if you follow this theory, from these snakes the virus also found its way into another spot, and from there was transmitted to people. So for example, they're in the market and they cut something and the blood goes flying and it touches someone on the face. That's one way to get infected. Or maybe it landed on something that somebody was drinking, and then that's another way that it got into somebody's body. There's a lot of ways that this thing could have transpired. Regardless though, this is why proper health and safety procedures are a necessity, and cross-contamination has to be avoided when dealing with livestock. Unfortunately though, that's a luxury in many parts of the world, and some places just don't have that available to them. So patient zero likely came into contact with the virus there in that market, and from there they spread it. Infection follows the rule of exponential growth. Once it gets going, it's hard to contain without extreme precautions like quarantining people. So the first guy passes it on to someone else, then those two people pass it on to two more, then those four pass it to four more, then those eight pass it to eight more, and before long, you have a growing epidemic. It's actually at the point now where China has shut down multiple cities. You can't leave them. Resources are flowing in, but nothing is going out. This is an attempt across the region to keep the virus stuck in a couple of key areas because number one, having it spread throughout all of China is disastrous because it's going to produce a lot more casualties. And number two, it just becomes harder overall to deal with when you don't know where the virus even is. It's actually to the point where I've read articles about Chinese doctors who are treating the Wuhan virus having to wear adult diapers because they don't have time to go to the washroom. There's just so many patients coming in, and those who maybe aren't even patients but feel like they are, who want to get checked up, want to get treatment, and the demand is far too high right now for the supply of medical officials to keep up with. It's becoming a major problem down there, and hopefully doesn't become a major problem around the world as well. Thus far, in China, it's killed roughly 60 people and infected over 2,000 worldwide, but much of that, though, is still in China. The infections have spread around the world to a couple of select countries, but it's not in astronomical amounts. So, what can we do to better protect ourselves? First, you should be aware of these symptoms and don't wait too long to report issues. Common signs of the infection include respiratory issues, fever, cough, shortness of breath, and more severe cases can cause pneumonia and kidney failure. So, it's a lot of lung-related issues there. Common cold prevention techniques are some of the better practices to administer to defend yourselves and those around you. Wash your hands. Cover your mouth when you sneeze or cough. Don't touch your face too much, and if you're sick, avoid contact with people. Stay home. And if you're not sick, don't expose yourself to those who are, unless you're a doctor. So, the patient in Toronto is 50 years old, and he tested positive for the virus, but a secondary examination will be required to confirm it. Now, he actually was in Wuhan, China recently, so the story checks out. It's quite likely he is in fact infected. Luckily though, health officials placed him in isolation to reduce further risk, and this brings me to one of my points. In all honesty, the federal government should be grounding planes entering Canada from high-risk areas. It's just logical. It's just good policy, at least until we further figure out things a little bit more. We don't know much about the virus. We know it can be fatal to vulnerable people, and we know that's coming from a particular place. To not shut down transportation between those places in Canada right now, in the midst of a growing problem, it's a bad idea. Now, right now, officials are saying, well, when people land from these places, we are quarantining the people and checking them, making sure that they're okay to re-enter Canada. But here's the issue though. Those people are all at risk now because on that very plane, where air is constantly recycled and you sit in close proximity to people, they could have been infected on the plane, and it will take time for these symptoms to show. When they land, they might be okay, but in the following days, they can show symptoms of the virus, which I think is probably what happened with this guy. He landed, he looked okay, he was later released into the public, and then they caught on to it when he started to show symptoms. That point is already too late though, because he can then spread it to other Canadians. Right now, there really isn't much of a logical case to make when it comes to not shutting down or at the very least restricting these types of flights. You endanger people via a contamination risk, and the same goes both ways. Don't travel yourself to high-risk areas right now. At least I think things cool down a little bit, or a vaccine has been produced and whatnot. Despite that, Ontario health officials claim that the risk to the public is currently low, even though we have a patient in our midst, and I don't think this calls for panic. I think that that's largely correct. The risk is low, but you should still take the precautions I listed here to stay safe. This is not a zombie apocalypse, as some of the media outlets are framing it to be. Not yet, at least. So you shouldn't treat it as if it is one. Something like SARS was a global epidemic, and research isn't showing that the Wuhan virus is on that same level. SARS came out of China in 2002, and it infected over 8,000 people, killing 774 of them. And that number included 44 Canadians. I believe Toronto was hit especially hard. And if you do the quick math on that, the death rate hovers at around 10%, which made SARS rather astronomical. It was likely to kill a lot of people. The Wuhan virus, for comparison, has produced around 60 deaths while infecting 2,000 people. The fatality rate is around 3%, and it's actually possible that that's the high end of the estimate. So some people may have been infected with the virus, and maybe they didn't identify that the Wuhan was actually the cause of their illness. Maybe they got some of the minor effects. They got these flu-like symptoms and they thought they had a flu, so it was not reported under this Wuhan Coronavirus. And given that, the infected rate could actually be higher than 2,000 with the same death toll, reducing the fatality rate, because if you die from these illnesses or these symptoms, people are going to draw the conclusion that it was the Wuhan virus. But if you're simply sick with it and you get better, we wouldn't be able to account for that. So right now, I'd say that one of the greater threats isn't actually the spread per se. The government appears to be doing a pretty good job at containing it, but where the real issue might lie is the virus contaminating further, it mutating to become a new thing altogether. Viruses can evolve with the slightest catalyst, and we've never encountered this strand before. One of the worst things that could happen is that this thing starts to diverge and spawn cousins that we also have never seen before. Foreign viruses in new environments around the world have a unique opportunity to change. It's a new environment, and there are new things that they're interacting with. It's important that we phase this out quickly, but precisely. Having a mutate and spawn siblings would be terrible, because then we'd have to figure out each of them. It won't just be one problem anymore, it'll be a multitude of issues. And this brings me to one of my questions now, involving the anti-vax group. Let's say that we do figure out a vaccine for the Wuhan virus, and Wuhan does become something big. The fatality rate grows and it does spread within Canada. Would these anti-vax people still refuse to get a vaccine, or would they consider it now because a very real threat before their eyes has become evident? Would they still not get their kids vaccinated due to whatever their ideology is, or would they succumb to the logical course of action? I do wonder there. One of my theories for some subset of the anti-vax movement is that these people simply just don't recognize the threat. They see the vaccines for all of these things that they don't even know can actually happen, like smallpox and whatnot. They've never met anyone with smallpox. They don't think it's going to happen to their kid, and therefore they're not going to take any supposed risks of developing autism. We're better off without it. That might be why a lot of them are considering just foregoing the vaccine. But now that there is an immediate threat that we know about, that we are seeing, and we're seeing people die from it, would they change their mind, or is their ideology so rigid that they would still put themselves and their loved ones in risk of succumbing to the virus? Then, if they do actually utilize this Wuhan vaccine, if we create it in this hypothetical situation, what does that say about their ideology? And even in this thought experiment, if they're willing to take the vaccine in this hypothetical, if they say, yeah, I'll think about it given that context, well, why not in our current context when things like smallpox do kill people? Even though you don't see it, even though you may not be close to it, even though there may not be headlines about it, it's still a reality, but you seem to be just ignoring it. That ideology does not add up to any logical premise. There is no sound reasoning behind it given these contexts here. If you were anti-vax when it came to other deadly illnesses, but not towards this one, what is the difference and why do you even pick up that flag of anti-vaxxing? Very interesting to think about. I do suppose that the answer could just be simply indoctrination, that they are under the mist of misinformation and they can't see clearly, so everything about it is just a haze. But that brings me to my next point now, and that is our reliance on things like antibodies. This could actually be a preview of what the future holds for us when it comes to viruses. Things that were once benign are becoming extremely dangerous because we've bred it that way. We have actively breeded superviruses. The Wuhan strain is a little bit different. That's just a mutagen of something we've never seen before that was created due to unfortunate crossbreeding, cross-contamination circumstances, but things like the everyday cold or the flu are becoming untreatable. Antibodies have been abused to the point where they are becoming ineffective now. We really could be looking at a future in the not so far distance where every single viral infection is on the level of the Wuhan epidemic. The logic behind this is that these antibodies don't kill everything. Often they kill 99% or 99.9%, but there is a fraction of the virus that it seeks to attack that does survive. The ones who survive have a reason for surviving. They likely have a mutagen or a strand of DNA that gives them some resistance, and now they have survived the attack. They're going to move on and breed. They're going to pass down that resistance onto their offspring. Now you've created a colony of viruses who are likely to be resistant to your antibodies, and given the appropriate amount of time, these viruses reproduce at a very fast rate. 100 generations down the road, they're all going to be immune to these antibodies, and that's the trend that we are seeing right now. The abuse has led to stronger bacteria, to stronger viruses. They can fight back against you now. This really is just Darwinism and natural selection. The strongest are surviving because we've created an environment where that's all the people or all the bacteria that is left to breed with. Everything there is strong and they're creating stronger and stronger offspring. It's almost as if that we have decided for the bacteria which traits we want them to manifest in the future. It's as if we were a god figure who has chosen for them how to become via our abuse of antibodies because we use them so much to our own detriment. We really need to take a step back and just observe how we are abusing the tools available to us. Antibodies are an amazing thing. They have so many wonderful purposes and they've advanced humanity massively. But we have to learn to view them in a use case of necessity and not one of luxury. Not to be chalking them in to our livestock's feed to produce a healthier animal that's bigger and can sell for more money, but reserving it simply for cases of life and death in humans or in animals who need them. Not for everyday use and every meal you get your 3 antibodies on top of your gravy. That should not be the way we use them, and we're creating a future where they have no effect anymore. The science is very clear on this. We are likely going to be facing a league of super viruses in the not so distant future, and luckily for us, we are developing ways of tackling that. But if these things fall through, we are going to be at the mercy of viruses, and everything could be a Wuhan or a SARS epidemic. The cold could evolve to the point where we can no longer effectively handle it. These are all bad things that we have to learn to fight against by reviewing our ways of using antibodies. And also, back on topic, more specifically to the cases of coronaviruses, I would argue that China has to really figure out how they are handling their animal and human interactions. SARS came out in 2002, now the coronavirus as well. These meat markets that are also called wet markets are not the best way to go about things. Sanitation has to be held in a higher regard, or you're simply asking for viruses to mutate in these environments here. So, that now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram @PerryPlatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.